Well, 16-minute video. Let's not make it 45, guys. Let me just read what this person said. She said, "Hi, how's your day been?" I will reply after the video. Not because I'm a dick, but because I'm dedicated to you guys right there watching. Right from that very camera right there. Anyways, no more talking. Shortest intro. The darkest philosopher in history, Arthur Schopenhauer. Let's go.
This video is sponsored by
Pursuit of
the book
Wonder.
summary service, Blinkist. Being one of the first philosophers to ever really question the value of existence, to systematically combine Eastern and Western modes of thinking, and to introduce the arts as a serious philosophical focus, Arthur Schopenhauer is perhaps one of the darkest and most comprehensive philosophers in Western history. Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in what is now Gdańsk, Poland, but spent the majority of his childhood in Hamburg, Germany, after his family moved there when he was 5. He was born to a wealthy family, his father being a highly successful international merchant. As a result of this, young Schopenhauer would be expected to follow in his father's footsteps. However, from an early age, he had no interest in business, and instead found himself compelled towards academics. And after going on a trip around Europe with his parents to prepare him for his merchant career, the greater exposure he would receive to the pervasive suffering and poverty of the world would cause him to become all the more interested in pursuing the path of scholarship and intellectually examining, down to its very core, how the world worked and why, or perhaps more accurately, how and why it appeared to work so negatively. After eventually going against his family's ready-made path of international business, Schopenhauer would attend the University of Göttingen in 1809, where, in his 3rd semester, he would become more introduced and focused on philosophy. The following year, he would transfer to the University of Berlin to study under a better philosophy program led by distinguished philosophy lecturers of the time. However, Schopenhauer would soon find academic philosophy to be unnecessarily obscure, detached from real concerns of life, and often tethered to theological agendas, all of which he despised. Eventually, he left the academic intellectual circuit and spent the following decade philosophizing and writing on his own. By age 30,
writing?
Schopenhauer had published the 2 works that would go on to define his entire career, contain his complete, unified philosophical system from which he would never deviate, and eventually influence the entire course of Western thought system.
Never deviate? His entire system? Which he never did. Hey, he's constant with it. Okay, he's consistent. Talk about consistency from my boy Schopenhauer.
He would never deviate and eventually influence the entire course of Western thinking with.
Did he?
The first groundwork of his philosophy was established in his dissertation on the fourfold root of the principle of sufficient reason, published in 1813, and his entire unified philosophical system, including his metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, aesthetics, value judgments, and so forth, was laid out in his subsequent masterwork, The World as Will and Representation, published in 1819. Despite these impressive works going on to hold major stake in Western philosophy, influencing some of the greatest thinkers and schools of thought thereafter, during this time, they would go mostly unnoticed. Over the decades following his early work, throughout his 30s and 40s, Schopenhauer would spend his time working to be a lecturer at university, as well as a translator of French to English prose, while continuing to write on and off along the side. He found very little success in all of it. His lectures were unpopular, his translations received very little interest, and his philosophical work remained mostly overlooked. Only by around his 50s did Schopenhauer finally start to receive any notable recognition at all. And only after publishing a book of essays and aphorisms in 1851 would he achieve the status of fame, which he would remain in for the rest of his life until he died in 1860 at the age of 72.
9 years later.
In terms of Schopenhauer's philosophical system established within his work, it is relevant to note that it leaned heavily on the work of his predecessor, Immanuel Kant. In Schopenhauer's mind, he was completing Kant's system of transcendental idealism. Building off his interpretation of Kant, Schopenhauer essentially suggested that the world as we know and experience it is exclusively a representation created by our mind through our senses and forms of cognition. Consequently, we cannot access the true nature of external objects outside our mental, phenomenological experience of them. Deviating from Kant, however, Schopenhauer would go on to argue that not only can we not know nor access the varying objects of the world as they really are outside of our conscious experience, but there is in
What does
fact
that mean?
of the world.
Not only can we not know, well, we can know about them. Do we know their experience like first person? Like, are we the bird? No, you can't. You don't know what it's like to be a bird, but I mean, you can observe them. That's some type of knowledge. I mean, we kind of know how they work, know what they look like. We know how they fought. We observe them. Like a lot of observation can get a lot done, but accessing is a different thing. The varying objects of the world, yes,
as they really are outside of our conscious experience, but there
Cannot
is in
do that.
fact no plurality of objects beyond our experience at all.
Wait,
Rather-
no, what?
But there is in fact no plurality of
Plurality.
objects beyond our experience at all. Rather, beyond our experience is, according to Schopenhauer, a singular, unified oneness of reality, a sort of essence or force that drives existence that is beyond time, beyond space, and beyond all objectification. Schopenhauer would go on to explore and define this force by referencing and probing into the experience of living within the body, suggesting that this is the only thing in the world that we have access to that is not solely a mental representation of an object, but is also a first-hand, subjective experience from within it. From here, Schopenhauer would suggest that what is found from within, at the core of our being, is an unconscious, restless, striving force towards survival, nourishment, and reproduction. He would term this force the will to live. Essentially, this would lead him to the conclusion that reality is made up of two sides, one side being the plurality of things as they are represented to a conscious apparatus, and the other side being the singular, unified force of the will. Hence the name of his masterwork, The World as Will and Representation. It is worth noting that the term will can perhaps be misleading and that it might seem to imply an intention or human-like conscious motivation, but the will, for Schopenhauer, is a blind, unconscious striving with no goal or purpose other than to keep itself going for the sake of keeping itself going.
That's
All
what
of the
every
material
animal
world
does.
operates by and through this will, moving, striving, consuming, and violently expressing itself.
Oh, so this is like panpsychism. Just call it will psychism. No, that doesn't make sense. No, like panwillism. Panwillism. That would probably be it, right? Panwillism. Wherein you're saying that it's like fundamental. It's like it permeates everything for things to happen. So the universe has a will to keep going. And I've thought about that myself. I think that's kind of what he's getting at, right? Like, look at us. Look at animals, right? We are just more complex manifestations of the universe. So if we have a will to live, does the universe have a will to live? Like anything that's like less complex. It's not like a animal or a very complex. It could be unicellular. It doesn't have to be cellular at all. It could just be matter. Does matter have will? Because look at what this does when it becomes complex and conscious. It still just kind of has a will, but it doesn't really know why it has a will. It just has a will.
In order to sustain itself. Schopenhauer's work was largely a response to Kant and the Western philosophical tradition, but his work also contains distinct notes of Hinduism and Buddhism. His conclusion of the nature of reality is strikingly similar to that of both, and his qualitative assessment of reality's negative relationship with the conscious self mirrors ideas central to Buddhism. This made Schopenhauer one of the first philosophers to ever really combine Eastern and Western...
Because Buddhist is life is suffering. I personally don't know if I could just simplify it that way. I'd always like to say life is an experience. Is suffering included? Of course suffering is included. But is that all there is, though? Could you say suffering is all there is? I don't think so. Maybe if you... I don't think so. For some people, maybe. But I wouldn't even like to. Even if life is horrible, you're born in You're born in Syria, war torn. You have a disease. You're born without legs. You have a flesh eating fungus. Like, just think of something horrible. You contract a disease, another one. Your parents die. You lose your house. You lose your dog. Don't have access to education. If you're that person I just described, and you're still alive, is life just suffering? But that's an extreme example. You can't base everything off of an extreme example. You might be able to argue, yes, that person is just suffering. I have no idea how that person couldn't go and question transcendence. They couldn't go because of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't even know if they'd have enough. They'd be able to breathe without a machine. I don't know if they'd be able to eat, have all the food that they need, sleep that they need, the shelter that they need. And without that, how can they move on to the next step? How can they worry about getting a girlfriend? How can they worry about having some nice sex? How can they worry about questioning the universe? They're not questioning the universe. And it's like, we need to stop. We need to get everybody to question, to get to the level where they can question the universe. Because otherwise, motherfuckers is just worrying about food and shelter. Because they don't have time to question all of this. Which is why, Arthur Schopenhauer was able to do it. He was born into a rich family. I'm sure there was no like lack of some shit. I mean, he was able to get to a university. I'm sure he always had shelter. He probably always had food. He might have always had sex, but that's I don't know about that one. That one, I don't know.
Thinking
but
in such a systematically comprehensive way. Especially similar to Buddhism, Schopenhauer would top off his philosophical medley with a layer of dark, unwavering pessimism. Unless suffering is the direct and immediate object of life, our existence must entirely fail of its aim. It is a layer of dark, unwavering pessimism. Unless suffering is the direct...
Pessimist. Okay, I'm not a pessimist. Unless suffering is the direct and immediate object of life. Immediate object. How are you using this word object here? Direct and immediate object. Like purpose? Like object. Here's the object. Our objective. You're using it in the sense of objective of life is to suffer or exist. Unless suffering is the objective of life. That's how I'm going to interpret that for right now. Our existence must
direct and immediate object of life. Our existence must entirely fail of
its aim. It is absurd to look upon the enormous amount of pain.
It is absurd to look upon the enormous amount of pain that abounds everywhere in the world and originates in needs and necessities inseparable from life itself as serving no purpose at all and the result of mere chance. Each separate misfortune...
Well, that's what a human would say. It is absurd to look upon the enormous amount of pain that abounds everywhere in the world and originates in needs and necessities. That's the same thing. I'm tripping. Inseparable from life itself, as serving no purpose at all, and the result of mere chance. So you're saying it must have a purpose for why we suffer? For why there is pain? That just seems like something a human would say. Who can question things, who understands and maybe is empathetic and can understand people, like can understand and look at pain and be like, dude, why does this happen to people? Look at all the pain. It's horrible. But you say, okay, there must be a purpose to this. Because of course, you got to say, because it seems like if there's no purpose to it, it just seems cruel. And therefore you go and make the assumption that it would be absurd to think that it all happened by mere chance. But it might all just be by mere chance. We don't know. Each separate misfortune as it comes seems no doubt to be something exceptional.
Fortune as it comes seems no doubt to be something exceptional, but misfortune in general is the rule, Schopenhauer wrote. As a qualitative assessment of the nature of reality, he would describe the will to live as a sort of malevolent force that we, as individual selves, become victims of in its process of continuation, deceived by our own mind and body to go against our fundamental interests and yearnings in order to carry it out. Since the will has our fundamental...
So what are our fundamental interests and yearnings? To not live? To kill ourselves? That you're telling me that would be our fundamental interest and yearning?
Interests and yearnings in order to carry it out.
That's definitely not what he's saying, but that's kind of how that seemed like he was saying it there.
Since the will has no aim or purpose other than its perpetual continuation, then the will can never be satisfied. And since we are expressions of it, neither can we.
Yes, it
The will
can.
can never be satisfied.
It could be satisfied if you just continue. The will would be satisfied if you continue to live. Like, will isn't everything, but we humans can kill ourselves. We can go against the will. We don't necessarily need will. There's a lot of us here. There's a lot of humans around now. You don't really even need will anymore. Like, well, maybe you still do.
In order to carry it out. Since the will has no aim or purpose other than its perpetual continuation, then the will can never be satisfied.
Oh.
And since we are expressions of it, neither can we.
Okay, I'm tripping. I get what he's
Thus,
saying.
we are driven to consume beings, things, ideas, goals, circumstances, and all the rest, constantly hoping we will feel a satisfaction or happiness as a result, while constantly being left in the wake of each achievement unsatisfied. Human life must be some kind of mistake. The truth of this will be sufficiently obvious if we only remember that man is a compound of needs and necessities hard to satisfy, and that even when they are satisfied, all he obtains is a state of painlessness where nothing remains to him but abandonment to boredom.
Jesus! If we want to remember that man is a compound of needs and necessities hard to satisfy, and that even when they are satisfied, all he obtains... Let me look at this from an objective standpoint. Are we a compound of needs and necessities? Yes, we do have needs. We're a system that needs to keep going, right? We need food and energy to continue. We need sleep to recover. We do have needs and necessities. Hard to satisfy for others, not as hard for others, maybe. And that even when they are satisfied, all he obtains is a state of painlessness where nothing remains to him but abandonment to boredom. So he's not bored when he's painless. Is that what he's saying?
Schopenhauer wrote. As the best possible ways of sort of escaping and dealing with this, Schopenhauer would put forth two primary methods. One, engaging in arts and philosophy, and two, the practicing of asceticism, traditionally being the deprivation of nearly all desire, self-indulgence, and everything past the bare minimum. In this latter method, Schopenhauer felt that by denying the will from being fed, so to speak, one would turn the will against itself and overcome it. However, he also recognized the sheer difficulty of this for the majority of people and suggested the average person should simply make their best efforts towards letting go of ideals of happiness and pleasure and rather focus on the minimization of pain. Suggested that the average person
so to not live asceticism. Oh, that's hard. That's very hard, dude. Westerners? Do you think Westerners are gonna have like what? Are you kidding me? This system is so fundamental. You think anybody over here? You must be crazy. You think I'm gonna look like this? This guy's anorexic. What the fuck?
In this latter method, Schopenhauer felt that by denying the will from being fed, so to speak, one would turn the will against itself and overcome it. However, he also recognized the sheer difficulty of this for the majority of people and suggested the average person should simply make their best efforts towards letting go of ideals of happiness and pleasure and rather focus on the minimization of pain.
Okay, that's
Happiness
fair enough.
in life, for Schopenhauer, is not a matter of joys and pleasures, but rather the reduction and freedom from pain as much as possible. The safest way of not being very miserable is to not expect to be very happy.
That's the Stoic
He
way.
wrote. Alternatively,
That's the Stoic way,
engaging
really.
in arts and philosophy, in Schopenhauer's mind, served as another, more accessible method. He felt that good art could provide a source of clarity into the nature and problems of being without any of the illusion or drapery. And while engaging in this sort of art, one would have a transcendent-like experience that provides a relief and comfort from existence. As a result of this concept, Schopenhauer would end up being one of the first thinkers to ever really introduce philosophical significance to the arts, and would eventually become known by many as the artist's philosopher.
Art.
Of course, throughout his work in general, Schopenhauer makes large, often unprovable, and unknowable claims about the nature of reality and the value of existing within it. Some of which is validly constructed and worth considering, but some of which is likely not.
I mean, it's not pointless to argue value of existence, but the value of existence is just a concept. Like, it's something we get to decide because we choose what value means. We're the judges of value. So it's like, what am I trying to say with that? Like, we're the judges of value. Okay. So should we value, it seems like kind of broad to just value existence. It's kind of broad. It would be value. I mean, is value all encompassing? Does everything need to have value? Don't know. Should we put value on it? Should we not? Is it applicable to put value onto existence? I mean, I guess you could. And if you do, what is it going to be? What's the value of existence? Well, to experience. I mean, otherwise, look out into the sky at night. Look at all those stars. If you're not in a city, which I mean, most people live in cities nowadays, but just look at any video of the universe, right? The beautiful things that happen out there, which it's just like, it's like fireworks, right? The value of it is to experience, right? It doesn't mean that because you experienced it, it's going to be so blissful and everything's just you're going to that you're going to feel great, that you're just going to feel happy. Your experience might be really tough. It might be filled with a lot of pain, but it's experience nonetheless. I don't think experience is really worried about what you're feeling. Experience doesn't care about what you're feeling. It's just like, it's a thing that happens. You're experiencing consciously. It's just like, and only the beings that experience consciously can question the value of existence. So it's like, okay, well, other animals don't need to do this, but we can. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to value existence? It's a fireworks show. I think it's beautiful when you're looking at it. I think it's beautiful. Of course, you don't want to get too close to the fireworks. They might blow up. Might blow up in your hand. Of course, a supernova is beautiful when you're looking at it from afar. If you're caught in a supernova, you're getting disintegrated. I mean, it's a fireworks show, man. And we get to consciously experience it and look up at it and wonder, like, wow, maybe we'll be there someday. It's so crazy. But it's like, the fact that an animal can question the value of existence itself is just absolutely insane to me. Should we even be allowed to do that? It seems like we're breaking like a fourth wall, honestly. That's what we're constantly just doing. We're just breaking fourth walls. It's crazy.
Ultimately, any attempt to define and assess the side of reality beyond logic and reason through systematic logic and reason is perhaps paradoxical in a way that is beyond repair. What precisely is the will? Where does it come from? Where does it end? And how can we know or prove it? And in terms of Schopenhauer's suggestion that one should turn against the will through an ascetic process of self-denial, if all of life operates through the will, to turn against it would seem to merely be the will turning against the will for reasons that favor it. And there can be no turning against the will if the will is doing the turning. Alternatively, considering the view of Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher who notably followed in Schopenhauer's footsteps, the endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction caused by the will is actually a good thing that we can use as fuel towards the process of self-overcoming and growth, which we can then obtain life's meaning from. Of course, this is the more
there we go. A more,
pleasant of the two interpretations, but it isn't clear which is more apt and or accurate, if either.
You're right.
Ultimately, Schopenhauer is another surprising yet seemingly common story where a highly important thinker, artist, or writer barely caught any recognition in their life, if at all only to die and end up with their name in nearly every history book on the subject. One trait these stories do all seem to have in common, though, is a refusal to stop, a refusal to budge from pursuing and defending the world as one sees it. Schopenhauer never deviated from the philosophical system he created in his 20s and never stopped confidently.
I think there's a will that is absolutely all-encompassing. I think he's right. It may not be. We maybe shouldn't call it a will. Maybe we should call it something else. I don't know. But a will may be applicable enough. I do see it. I mean, there's a will to do something. Maybe the universe is trying to do something. I don't know. I always question, maybe that's why consciousness came into play, because it needed to do so in order to complete a task, to do something. It's like maybe the universe is trying to do something, which is just like it's just nature. It's just like how can it be trying to do something? Does it have some sort of sentience, consciousness? How can you you don't see it consciously trying to do something, but it's just like there's this will though. There's this will thing that of course it's going to manifest itself better maybe through more complex beings, which is why look at us. We're going to the moon. We're going to outer space. We want to get to Mars. We have these things that we want to do when we don't always necessarily need to do them. We don't need to build the Empire State Building. We don't need to do all these things. We don't need to do them, but we do them anyway. We don't need to survive, but we do it anyway. We don't need to experience, but we do it anyway. And some people actually give up. Some people are saying, no, I don't like this experience shit is ass. Let me just dip on my own accord. And then that's, the suicide, I don't know. I don't know what to make of all this. It's certainly interesting. It's very interesting. I hope to maybe one day just get to know a little more. Because, I mean, what's the value of, as a philosopher, do they ever question their own profession? Do they ever question what they do? It's just like, there is value to be had in questioning things, but it's just like, doesn't it kind of upset you that you're never going to know everything? But the point is not to know everything. It's just but it's like, doesn't it upset you? Maybe that's not what I meant. Maybe, does it upset you that, what if the most important thing that you want to get answered won't get answered? Does it upset you that, I don't know. Let me just play the video. I don't know.
Working to build upon it and reinforce it throughout his life, despite the world seeming to suggest to him he should do otherwise. And yet, now it is hugely significant to the world that he did exactly what he did. For some, his work might be bleak and disconcerting, but for others, his work, like all great works of dark, melancholic honesty, is comforting, relieving, and legitimizing. It reminds us that we are not crazy, and our sadness and suffering are not unfounded, even when they may feel like it. We are merely put in a crazy, sad, violent reality with the mind and body that are often all in conspiracy against us. Because of this and many other reasons unmentioned, his work would go on to influence artists like Richard Wagner and Gustav Mahler, writers like Marcel Proust, Leo Tolstoy, and Samuel Beckett, and thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Sigmund Freud, and Ludwig Wittgenstein, as well as many others, ultimately influencing the course of modern thinking forever. Having been one of the first to properly and philosophically bring the value of life,
and all of a sudden somehow it stemmed from this guy. All of a sudden we get XXX Tentacion. I'm calling it now.
And the possibility of meaning into question, Schopenhauer helped locate the early budding problem of the growing agnostic world that philosophy would need to address. With humanity seemingly suspending further out into a void of meaning, his unyielding and fearless confrontation with the nature of existence, including all its horrors and miseries, revealed an opening of new possibilities towards finding answers from within.
But it's like, what are you asking? What are you asking? What are you hoping to get out of nature? What answer? It's just like, it's purposeless. You gotta... is that a cop-out? Are you gonna say it's a cop-out? It just seems like the answer is it's purposeless. But is that a cop-out? Fuck! How do you... that's an unanswerable last question. It's like, what happened before the Big Bang? Like, dude. It's like it's likely just origin. The origin is the Big Bang. Something just blew up. I always question what put it there. What like what realm was it encompassing? Not what put it. Why? Where? What? Definitely not who. That's not my question. I don't ask that. um, just like how? How is it there? Let's say in the center of a sphere. How is it there? How? Why? The universe is all there is, and I always think like, ugh, I always think of it like we only know systems, so we think of the universe maybe as like a system, and it's like, okay, what created the system? No, it technically created itself. Fuck, doesn't work like anything. That's my theory on it, but it's just like I always wanted to question that. I'm like, okay, what put it there? Right? Because that's the primal way of thinking, right? It's just like, okay, we think everything has to have an origin, and it's like, okay, could it really just blow up out of nowhere for no reason? It doesn't make sense to our human brains, but it's a possibility that that's just how it is, just how it could be a possibility that like nature is definitely purposeless. I mean, what purpose could you find? Like, tell me, what are your theories of what purpose there is? There's will, right? I do notice that how animals want to not die; they just want to keep going. For what? How did they just have this innate sort of arbitrary thing that they just want to live? They just want to keep going to do what exactly? To experience? They want to keep going to do what? We notice that a lot of things want to do something, right? We notice the systems we want to eat, we need to drink. A lot of our desires come from emotions and our needs to do what? To want to eat, to want to have our basic hierarchy of needs, to want to do whatever, right? So it's just like, what does Will want? Why are animals why do they keep living? Why do they must they reproduce? Why do systems do that? Why must they keep reproducing here on Earth? Is it special about Earth? Does that happen anywhere in the universe? Because I really only just see it on Earth, right? With cells. Like life forming cells. And it's like, I don't know if atoms do that. I mean, look, things collide all the time. They make bigger things. They die out. Supernovas. It happens. But and the universe is constantly expanding. Think about that. It's still expanding. The Big Bang is an expansion. So let me connect that to life. Life is technically expanding. Life is technically always growing and expanding. Doesn't actually need to. We also don't know why, but life keeps going. Doesn't actually need to. So how does it keep expanding? Oh fuck, I don't know. But matter is not being created, and my teacher didn't explain to me why it keeps expanding. And matter is not being created here either. So how do we keep expanding? How do we how do we have all these kids that go to waste? How all that matter is just, don't we produce testing like semen? How are we producing it? Where are we producing that from? Fuck, I have no understanding. This the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. You know, we're producing shit all the time. We're producing fluid. We're producing saliva. So like, how are we producing that? We're not just creating matter though. We're not just like, saliva is technically matter. We're not just creating matter out of nowhere. But it's like, look at the similarity in the universe that's constantly expanding for no reason, and us who keep living for no reason. We just keep living, and the universe keeps expanding. Is it to do what exactly? Is there matter not necessarily being created, but maybe making new things, being spread out to have more availability to make more things, to produce, not produce, but like to assemble more things, to give them a higher, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. We need a question. That's likely the end of the video. He's going to talk about Blankist.
From within. an opening of new possibilities towards finding answers from within.
We have a whole universe inside of us. I mean, we have the same basic chemistry. God damn,
This video
bro.
was sponsored by...
Oh, it's fucking crazy to question it all. That's why people don't like to do it.
That's why people aren't philosophers, because they just don't want to bother themselves with these questions, man. There's so much, sometimes, I mean, you gotta love knowledge, and there's, like, definitely, like, a sort of, like, like, value to knowledge and knowing things, but it's just like, dude, I totally understand why people sometimes don't want to know a lot of times. They don't care. Like, sometimes I understand why people just willfully ignore certain things, because it's like, where are we going? It's like, am I gonna ever be fulfilled? But that's not the point. The point as a philosopher isn't to necessarily be fulfilled. It's to question things. Fuck! That will thing really got me thinking. Will. I did notice that. I never knew about Arthur Schopenhauer's writings, but I did always notice that. I see a all-encompassing will in beings that we just want to keep going. Why? There isn't a why. Stop asking why. Stop asking how. Should we just stop asking? Is it just because we're limited by our human brains? Because the way we our associations to things, that we associate things to have meaning. We associate things with having a why, a where, a what, when, how. We can figure out when, what, where's, how's, why's for a lot of things, but certain things they just can't be found. And is that like just a concept? The concept of things not having a purpose, the concept of things not being conceivable, a paradox. Is that like a paradoxical concept? Like a thought? Like when I used to try to think about what came before the universe, that I would my brain would block out. It's just like I don't even have an image. It hurts to not have an image of like anything to even reference. Because I mean we're not thinking of anything new, we're just referencing. Nobody's thinking of any new idea that nobody else has ever thought of. Anything completely new, brand new, and extraordinarily new that nobody has ever thought about that. We're just working and making edits to shit that we already know. And we're taking two things, we're comparing them, contrasting them. We have ideas, concepts, images that we use to try to understand the world. And this image of purposelessness is not one that we're very common with. So that's why they keep asking. And that's why I was wondering, is it a cop-out to just say it's purposeless? Is that a cop-out? Because people are going to keep wondering, and I think that's okay. You should be able to, because we can't prove that it's purposeless, so people should keep wondering. But I don't think I'm going to be one of those people, right? I think maybe I'll try to leave that up to other people to keep wondering if maybe there is a purpose that we can infer. But it seems to me that a lot of these things are purposeless. And yes, it hurts because that's like boring. It's just like we kind of want there to be a purpose. At least the Westerner thinks it's boring, according to Alan Watts. But anyway, man, I might do another video. Maybe not. I'll see y'all next time, man. Hope you enjoyed that. Arthur Schopenhauer. Yes, sir.